Hello and welcome to BA Brew. I'm Debbie.
I'm Lynn.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're really pleased to have Lynn with us because I know this is going to be a subject that's dear to her heart, because we're talking about this term organisational agility, which you hear all the time these days. So Lynn, start us off. What does organisational agility actually mean to you?
Well, I can tell you what it isn't, and then I can tell you what it is. I think people confuse organisational agility with their IT department using agile techniques, and it's not that. So let's just park that bit.
Okay.
What is organisational agility is the ability for the whole organisation to embrace agile thinking and agile mindset. So the organisation can work in a fluid structure and stream to achieve the outcomes for the organisation, making it adaptable and flexible. So it's really, there's lots. The Business Agility Institute has 3 domains of business agility that looks into operations, the operations of the organisation, the individuals within the organisation, and leadership. And then there is another, the Business Agility Canvas that Kareem Harbert's created through Agile Centre, and that has the 6 areas of business agility, and this is the one that we use within our organisation. And it's really around leadership, which is one of the key challenges for organisations actually becoming agile. Organisational culture: is your culture flexible enough? Is your culture one of growth mindset and outward mindset and things like that? Organisational structures: your structures there to help the flow of information, or do they impede? Do you have lots of silos? That actually means there's lots of handoffs within the organisation. It means the structure that actually prevents the organisation being flexible and adaptable. And then there's the governance and policy, and we love that, right? Because governance is all about the funding and people in funding areas, finance departments always like everything like ticked box exercises. They want to know how much it's going to cost up front, which in an agile context is a bit of sort of an anti-pattern. You sort of don't know. You might have to think about how you can create agility around some of that sort of financing. And then finally, ways of working. And ways of working is how do you actually work in an agile way, which I think most people are more familiar with because we can go Scrum, that's a way of working. But that's the last bit really you should be focused on. It's all the other 5 elements I think that make an organisation agile. And when you put all of that together, it's quite a big challenge to get an organisation, even a small organisation, to really truly be adaptive, because it really starts with the leadership, and it starts with leadership behaviours, walking the walk, not talking the talk.
And I absolutely agree with that. It's really interesting because when I think about agility, I always think right at the heart of it is leadership, because you have to almost not just empower, but almost give people license. I think, Mike, you and I talked about this license once, didn't we? To allow people to actually have that license, to have the authority, if you like.
Yeah. I think that is a key thing, isn't it? And that you do have to sort of lead by example and show. Yes, you can try things out. You can sort of experiment with this a little bit, but that has to be core, isn't it? If you don't actually, if it's not clear. The leadership, it's not a clear sort of steer from the leadership that actually you are allowed to do these things. We are allowed to challenge everything potentially. Then people are not going to have the confidence to do it. And I've seen examples where people have sort of said, well, you can go and work out how to do this a different way, and then they come back and present something that they've spent a lot of time on and say, oh no, that's wrong. Don't like that. And you think, okay, how bad a message is that to sort of say, yeah, you're okay to go away and experiment and work out, but when you come back with an answer, it's the wrong answer. Not even thinking about it.
I see this all the time with my clients, and I talk about it as them going in with their long screwdriver, to sort of try and fix the problems. And you get this more from people that have grown up within the organisation and been promoted to levels of leadership, but they haven't given up their understanding of the day job. And they're almost the worst people to empower. You actually saw this within Apple with Steve Jobs to some extent.
Yeah.
But it's that whole concept of, how do you empower somebody? And this is, you have to give empowerment. People can't take empowerment. And I think leaders forget that. And one of the things within, Agile, within business agility is, I don't know if you come across David Marquet's work on Turn the Ship Around. And he talks about intent-based leadership. And I love the whole premise. I know it's an American. I'm sure we've got brilliant British naval comparisons to this, but it's such a good book. he talks about, as a commander of a submarine or a naval ship, you're the one that makes all the decisions, but he doesn't have all the knowledge. And what he wants is, rather than have one person thinking and one person making all the decisions, he wants 350 people thinking and making decisions, with him making the most critical one. So I just think that's really interesting within organisations to think about, how do you go about empowering people? How do you do intent-based leadership in a way that people feel empowered, but haven't got to keep coming back and asking permission all the time?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the techniques that we talked about when we did the BA Brew on leadership was John Adair's team, task, individual.
Yeah.
And I think when you're looking at things like leadership and then empowerment, or this license to operate, if you like, license to take things forward, I think you do have to consider those different elements. And sometimes with task, and this comes back to this intent approach, I'm a very outcome focused person. And I think if you're thinking about the outcome, then you can think about the best way to get there. And you can think about the best people to work on it and the skills that are needed. If you're very focused on task in terms of process, I don't think agility is ever really going to happen, because actually you can get, we all know, you can get so bogged down in following methods, following processes. And I know to a certain extent, sometimes people need that because it's a bit of a safety blanket, but actually it can really just get everybody just stuck in the mire, don't you think? And losing their whole focus on what it is you're trying to achieve. And I also think sometimes that also means they lose focus on who the customer is. Mm. And to me, we talk about adaptability, responsiveness. Well, responding to what and to who is a question for me.
I think this is a really key point, because I think those organisations that are adaptive, that are flexible, that do have business agility within them, are the ones that are surviving in a market that's very competitive and continuously changing, and not just by COVID. But I think the consumers now are expecting so much of organisations, not just in the products that they receive, but in the way they obtain the service. And Debbie, I know that you know loads about service science and service thinking, so this is very much in your realm. But the whole point of an agile business is this, one of the things is, how do you disrupt the environment that you're in to be ahead of your competitors?
Yeah.
So how can you be disruptive in what you're offering to make that step? How brave are you to do that? And if all you measure within your organisation is the financials, then actually you're not going to get that, because you're not giving you've got to have that balanced scorecard approach, haven't you, across all of those things. So I think it all comes into that. Like, business agility is about the organisation being in a position that it can identify new markets for customers that didn't even know they wanted them, but also really get into the heads of the consumers and think about it from a service as well as a product delivery mechanism as well.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you mentioned Steve Jobs, because he was one of the people who always used to think about what is it that people need that they don't know they need. And I think with agility, because the world is changing, because digital technologies are coming up all the time to allow us to do different things, because the need to be responsive and adaptable to customers' needs is ever present, you often have to think in a different way. And Mike, you mentioned experimentation, which I think is quite interesting in the agility piece as well, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. But I think there's a bigger thing there around what are we trying to achieve with our agility anyway, which is there's a bit of planning that needs to be done. And it might be that you can just do little bits of experimentation and extend things, but actually, what are we trying to do as an organization as a whole? And it might be that we're responding to something like a pandemic, or we might be responding to, the pace of change that we've got now is increasing and ever going to be increasing with all the new things we can do with technology. So actually, we've got to learn to be able to move things around a bit more quickly, because actually our customers are demanding things a lot quicker turnaround, aren't they? They're expecting things on their phones. They're expecting things to happen quickly, rather than waiting 12 months or 18 months for something to come out. And that's quite challenging. And if you've got organizations that have got a more staid and steady culture, and where we've always done things this way, that's going to be quite difficult for them to move. How do you influence, or how do you make that change within an organisation where you've got that sort of old cultural feel?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, as well, because when we talk about customers, that's a very, very large group with all sorts of different characteristics. So if we're trying and if we're really embedding agility, you can't just talk about customers as a big group. You know, you've got to do some sort of actually breaking of that down. And then we come into techniques that we're very, very comfortable with. But that sort of brings me on to another topic in this, which is, do you need people running the organization who are business analysts for agility to happen? What do you reckon, Lynn?
Do you need do we need business analysts in the organisation to
Running?
help?
Well, and in, yes.
Yes, definitely. I mean, in some of the organisations I work, the business analysis are the people that really help. For instance, let's just say you start with, what is the vision for business agility within the organisation?
Yeah.
Who's writing that? Who's communicating that? Who's helping the execs understand that? What are the benefits to be gained from that? I know, you think with Agile, you still need to have a clear vision of what you're trying to do, and you need to have some measure of success that the execs are going to buy into if you're going to take that. So business analysis plays a part. It's all that strategic part of business analysis. So I think there are levels, aren't there, here? So you've got the strategic level, and then you've got the sort of middle level, which is all the middle managers, and then you've got that whole change culture. What you're trying to do with business agility is get people to think differently about the way that they're doing their processes. Now, business analysis can be at the forefront of that, or the business analyst can, in terms of using different techniques like lean change to experiment with new ways of doing the old processes.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a shake-up. It's not a dramatic change. I don't think business agility should be this huge transformational change piece, that there's going to be 5 years from now we will be an agile organisation. It's a very subtle sort of subliminal thing that sort of grows organically as the culture changes. And you can't change culture by changing culture, right? You have to change culture by changing people. And I think the business analyst can be really instrumental in understanding that and sort of marching that forward. And the ways of working, in terms of looking at the way the teams are working, their processes, how they operate, those sorts of things, especially agile BAs as well, that really get the backlogs and understand how to do that. They can be really instrumental. So I think there are 3 levels of which you can look at how you change an organisation to be more agile. And I think that business analysis and the business analysis skill set actually sits quite firmly in all of those.
Yeah. And don't you think, wouldn't it be good in an ideal world? Here's my vision for the world now, okay? If lots of managers of all sorts of different disciplines understood some of the business analysis thinking, because we've talked about, intent and outcome. Yeah. We've talked about different customer groups. We've talked about maybe looking at processes. And one of my favorite things is actually looking at things and saying, what's the assumptions that are underlying this that actually we need to be challenging? Yeah. One of the other things we do is we say, well, first of all, is there an issue here? And if it is, what is it? So let's frame that. And then we say, what are different options? Because it's too easy just to jump into something which could be a highly bureaucratic process or even software. And so wouldn't it be a brilliant world if business analysis ruled, basically? No, but if everybody understood some of those skills, because sometimes if people are in a management role, they don't get access to those skills. Whereas actually, I think they could just be so useful for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. It is a shame. And what I see myself is that those BAs that are good, and I know this even within my client work, when I try to move out of an area, they don't want me to go because I'm the one that's challenging. I'm the earworm, if you like, for the product owners, for the seniors. I'm the one that's in there sort of giving them the confidence, and they think if they're not sure about something, they'll get an honest opinion and they'll get all of that. So they get all of that business analysis thinking through me. And I think that's what we need to be for managers, and leaders in organisations. We need to be that conscience, isn't it? I always think I'm a bit like Jiminy Cricket, like sitting on their shoulders, a conscience.
I can see you doing that, Lynn.
Yeah,
I like the idea of sort of that business analysis in the community. So as business analysts, we go into an area, we do some wonderful BA work, and impart a bit of business analysis understanding with the people that we've been talking to. So they're building up a base set of business analysis skills that then they can apply some of that thinking themselves. They don't necessarily need to come back and get that particular BA in, because they've learned some of that and got some of that thinking. It's interesting that idea of you said about building things at that sort of low level before, but you've also got to have that empowerment piece. So how do we marry up? Sorry, I've gone off at a complete tangent now. I was thinking about that sort of small scale change thing, the experimenting, and then thinking, how do we do that within the scope of a larger organisation? How do we get that stone to gather a bit more moss as it's rolling?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we do have ways of looking at things, and it sort of comes back to what Lynn was saying just now, where you can see a hierarchy of things, you can see things, breaking down, and I don't mean in sort of really deep silos or anything, but it allows you to understand something holistically and then maybe take it into different areas. And I think sometimes we've got techniques like, say, value streams, which allow us to take that very high level view and then focus on, well, what is the value outcome? What is the value we want to co-create, to use one of my favorite things? Sorry, I couldn't stop.
It's on in the podcast. We mentioned that. Normally that's early doors.
I had to get it in somewhere. But, when you think about it, if you can think of even things that are quite complex processes and systems, if you can get that, you've got that high level mental view then, it's in your head. You understand what the focus is, and then you can start to unpick, but you keep that horizon in mind. That's what I always think of. What's the horizon?
And that's an interesting thing, actually, because I always talk about 3 levels of change. And one of them is the vision, that's strategic. And that should be quite long. It should have quite a lot of longevity. It shouldn't change, but it should be so high level that it has no detail, that it's a projection of where they want the organisation to be in the direction that they want them to travel, not what they actually should be. So it's that conceptual view, isn't it, almost?
It is.
The direction. And then I think there's, we have a lot of experimentation, which can experiment very small things over, iterations. And they could be 2-4 week iterations. And, people don't really change every 2 weeks. Habits take at least 28, 30 days to form. I mean, if you've ever started trying to give up alcohol in January or go to the gym, all right, new year, I'm going to go to the gym. Everyone gives up by February. And that's because habits take over 30 days for people to form habits. So if we're changing every 2 weeks, or we're delivering change every 2 weeks, that's not going to work either. So we need this sort of jam in the sandwich, if you like, which is incremental change. And I think you sort of bring things into that. And the incremental change is, how do we take some of the elements from the strategic direction, look at some of the experience, and bring it into stuff that we can talk about in a more, that's got a little bit more substance to it, that's got a what's in it for me for individuals. How can we empower people to be part of that and get excited about that? And then how do we use that to inform whether the strategic direction is the right direction for the organisation to go in? So it's not about the top down coming down, it's about having something top down so we can do something, so then we can inform whether the top down was the right thing to do at all.
Yeah, and keep that eye on what we're trying to achieve is usually, as you said, quite a high level thing. Yeah. So actually it's distinguishing between that sort of why we're doing this, what we're trying to achieve, and then looking at the how in a much more sort of incremental, experimental, test and learn, all those sort of great ways. And pulling that all together really helps. I think as well, if you're looking at things in a bit more incrementally, it's eating the elephant, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Whereas, or what? Sorry,
not eating the elephant whole.
Not eating it whole. Yes, eating it in bits. But the thing is, if you do that, I think people can get a grasp on it. Whereas if we try and aim at something very large, a lot of the time it's just too much to take on board.
Yes, I think that's where people get into that fight or flight mentality.
Absolutely.
Disconnect from the change.
There's also about that feeling of having achieved something. So if you've got something that's small enough and it's you've done it and it's successful, or if you've done it and it's not successful but you've learned something, then that, if that timescale is of a reasonable length, then you can keep some kind of momentum going. if you're looking at something and you're not going to see any benefit from it until 2 years down the line, it's hard to keep focused on that, isn't it? It's hard to.
Yeah.
Actually, thinking about this, I think we can sort of bring together like the concepts of empowerment, leadership, intent-based leadership, and small experiments all together in the conversation we've just had. Because if you enable people to do continuous improvement and they are empowered to make small changes within their own areas, because you've got good intent-based leadership here within your organisation, then your organisation will naturally continue to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's key to business agility.
I think that's right. And I think there are some key tenets, and I think we've covered a lot of them. So I think that's probably where we need to be to say, that's enough of our discussion on organisational agility, but it was really interesting, lots of stuff to think about, and I think we could probably have gone on for a lot longer. So thanks ever so much for tuning in, and I hope you found that useful. And if anybody is interested in sending us through ideas on other subjects that we can discuss on the BA Brew, then please contact us at babrew@AssistKD.com. But other than that, thank you very much, everybody, and hopefully see you on another BA Brew.